Welcome, everyone. I'm going to talk a bit today about energy vampires. So, to start, I think it's helpful to understand that terms like energy vampires come in and out of fad. So, we tend to replace certain terms or certain thoughts, certain phrases based on what's going on in our culture and our world at the time. And so, we're currently going through a period where a lot of our speech is sort of therapized. What I might talk about in terms of energy vampires might fit under clinical criteria for things like borderline personality disorder or covert narcissism or, things like that when uh, it can be helpful to think about things from multiple frames, not just what is popular at the time. And I think that understanding the mechanics and reasoning why of emotional and energetic vampires is really important because it is such a common phenomena and so many people get drained by interacting with them. And so in this video, I'll go over the three types of energy vampires, their motivations for being, and most significantly, what you can do about them. Basically, how to stop being drained, how to stop being targeted by them. So the first two types of energy vampires can kind of go together. They have some similarities, some overlap, and so somebody might fit into the first and second kind of energy vampire. And so the first two categories I'm going to talk about are people who are not terribly conscious of what they are doing. They don't know that they are energy vampires. They don't understand that they are draining other people. They don't understand the mechanisms behind this. Typically, what they often feel is a great deal of suffering and loneliness, or sometimes boredom. And so let's talk about the first kind of energy vampire. This is somebody who drains your energy in a sort of softer way. This is somebody who, when you talk to, always has something negative to say, always has a complaint. This will happen a lot of times with health, with drama going on in their lives, with circumstances going on in their lives. They are always looked at in a negative lens. This can be something that is quite soft. Like you talk to somebody and they will talk your ear off about their latest health issues. This can be something on that continuum that does become quite harsh. For example, somebody calling you at 2 a.m. because they're caught up in another drama with their partner, their roommate, something like that. And in that situation, the thought is that they want to reach out to somebody, they want support, but there can be an underlying thought of that their reason for reaching out and wanting that support is to drain somebody else of energy. And so the clearest sign of this, if you are, kind of looking at yourself, looking at your own energy, is that if you are interacting with somebody, if you feel completely drained and exhausted after talking to somebody, that's a pretty good sign that there's some mechanism going on in which they are draining your energy. This is particularly sort of apt for people who tend to be in the roles of, being more empathetic, being kind of the natural therapist of the group. There can be a thought or even a resentment of people going to you and expecting you to be the counselor, to be the reasonable one, to be the mediator. For other people's inability to emotionally regulate, to deal with their own stuff. And so the root of this first type of energy vampire is not anything terribly nefarious. It is most often that they are struggling with things like being seen, being heard, um, feeling like they are isolated, separated, that nobody is there for them. There's often a sense in kind of if we go further along the spectrum of this type of energy vampire, there is a sense of soul loss. And what this is experienced as is a sense of emptiness and loneliness that is experienced within. And this is the root for this type as well as the second type of this energy vampire. And why they do what they do is that they feel this emptiness on a soul level. And what they are trying to do is to fill that hole with other people's energy. And so if I were to recap, I'd say that the first type of energy vampire takes on energy or elicits energy from others in the form of compassion, empathy, time, listening, being there for other people. And I think it's wonderful to be there for other people, but it is a question of if this is one-sided, and in a lot of cases, there is an overall pervasive negativity that is utilized as a reason to feed through the mechanism of complaint to other people. And again, this is something that can be seen so regularly in this world. There are so many people who feel lonely, who feel sad, who feel isolated, who feel that sense of emptiness and disconnection within. And they are looking to connect. They are looking to connect with others who can express empathy towards them. Um, but there's always a question of energy vampires. That hole within them is not going to be filled by other people's energy, compassion, or time. It is going to be filled by them taking responsibility for themselves and looking within. Um, and what is really sad about the first and second type of energy vampire is that a lot of times what happens is that this is a perpetuating cycle, especially for the first person, because what happens is that people don't want to be around them. People don't want to be drained or around somebody who is continually negative or, sort of sucks them dry of their compassion like this. And so their most frequent complaint will be that nobody is there for them, nobody wants to be around them. As we get to soon with the second type, there might even be a history of desertion, abandonment, cut off friendships and relationships, especially in the severe type of energy vampires. Because if you are around somebody and come away from them feeling drained, feeling unsupported yourself, feeling a sense of negativity, that's not going to be somebody that you want to go out for tea with or, regularly spend time with. And so we get to the second type of energy vampire. And this is somebody who, again, the root cause of their energy vampiricism is that hole on a soul level. However, this type of energy vampire is definitely more malevolent. What they are doing to feed on others is to provoke reactions. And so this person is not looking for sympathy, empathy, support. This person is almost always stuck in a victim mode where everyone is against them, where everyone and everything is, anti them. And so they are so far sort of lost in that victim mentality. That emptiness within them is so big, so wide that they've gotten lost within it. They feel completely separated and alone from reality, and they're not able to picture any type of connection, especially a healthy, sustaining connection. And so while the first type of energy vampire often does have friends, family, that will be there for them and will just feel a little bit drained after the holidays, maybe. Or maybe if you're in the service position, you'll come away from your interactions with your regular at the coffee shop or something like that, being like, oh, this guy is just really lonely, but you know what? I feel kind of depleted interacting with him, sort of thing. Um, the second type of energy vampire is particularly doing things to provoke an emotional response. Some of the bigger emotional responses are fear and anger. And so they almost always are aiming for those emotional responses. These are the types of individuals that look for weak spots within a person and will particularly point those out so the person feels afraid and goes into fight or flight mode, or even freeze mode, because that amped up nervous system energy is easy to feed off of. Any sort of amped up energy is available and ready for them to feed off of. Similarly, that a lot of energy vampires in this category have a weird sense of intuition. Their sight, their understanding of reality is completely obscured by the large hole in their soul, so to speak. But they are able to get this sort of energetic read of people, which is similar to the energetic read that a lot of abusers tend to get of people. People that might be more vulnerable, more open, or have more energy to them, more availability to kind of their repeat whatever cycles they're hoping to repeat. I'll get into that in just a moment, and so um, what this type of energy vampire will strike in a couple of different ways. First, they will look for vulnerable people, people who have clear emotional dysregulation themselves, who clearly can be sort of pointed at, mocked, made fun of, otherwise sort of needled to get some sort of emotional response from them. And when they get that emotional response, they feed off of them. They are satisfied for a brief moment because it gives them a sense of power, it gives them a sense of control, and it temporarily, which is the underlying, need or thought, it temporarily fills them with energy. But any energy that is not our own is ultimately not really going to stick around, or more importantly, fill us up, especially in those sort of soul places. And so what happens is that this person needs to feed again and again and again. And they will do this by creating drama, by creating emotional havoc, and by using people's vulnerabilities against them, weaponizing them in order to get an emotional response. Because emotional responses and nervous system responses are quite the energy to feed off of. It's kind of like a feast for them. If we're looking into this category as well, there are also a certain type of energy vampire in this second category who specifically targets people who have a fair amount of energy. So they tend to go after people who are energy workers, who are therapists, who are spiritual healers, who have done a lot of meditation, who are teachers and leaders in their field who have cultivated themselves to a great deal. And the thought behind this is that, yeah, this person has a lot of energy, they have a certain type of power, and if I can gain access to that power in any way, then that will let me feed off of their energy. And so while this person will start out with things like we talked about, that people will, energy vampires will do with kind of people who will be quick to react to anger or shame or fear energies. Um, The energy vampire in this category, targeting people who have a great deal of energy, who've done a great deal of self-work on themselves, will be one of escalation. And we see all sorts of datelines and TV shows about this sort of stuff, but it happens when, kind of their usual methods don't work. And so what happens is that they escalate. They start harassing, they start trying to get other parties involved. They do whatever they can in an attempt to point themselves as the ultimate victim and the person who has power, who has energy, as somebody as the ultimate villain. And in that way, they can create a diluted narrative in their mind that lets them stalk, harass, otherwise bother the person, in order to, and in an attempt to create an emotional response, create a nervous system response, but also to gain access to cultivated energy. So soul level energy, chi level energy, the fruits of the labors, so to speak, of somebody who has meditated for a long time, or who has done other cultivation work for a long time. This happens quite a bit with shamans, with people in martial arts communities, with energy workers, and even with therapists and, people in those sort of healing fields. And it turns into a big deal, and it's unfortunate because these type of energy vampires are so wounded on a soul level that the idea of them, what they're doing is wrong, or that they could gain some sort of support to feel better, more purposeful, to kind of close that hole in their soul within themselves is just a bridge too far for most of them. And so they will keep up behavior, keep up craving and looking for energy like this. Um, and it will be quite destructive to their lives, to their existences. People who are in this kind of more severe energy vampire, malevolent sort of sphere are always quite wounded people, and they really and truly don't understand why nobody wants to be around them, why people keep on cutting them off, why relationships end, why they can't maintain friendships, why nobody wants to be around them. And so hopefully such individuals can someday take responsibility for themselves and do the healing work to recognize that the common denominator in their lives is themselves. And if something keeps on happening to them, that it's worth taking a look at within themselves rather than creating sort of all of these delusions and unfortunate situations and quite literally pushing people away. Um, I will say also, as a part of the second group of energy vampires, that what there are some people, and we don't like to think about this in this world. We like to think of people as being wounded, and that offers us some sort of explanation, some sort of reprieve from really contemplating the really darker aspects of our nature. When you really sit with the darker aspects of our nature, there is a form of energy vampire that is part of the second category, who may or may not have been wounded in childhood and, hurt people, and all that sort of stuff. But that they would be a part of, what we clinically would consider the sociopathic spectrum. So I think it's 1 out of 25 people is somewhere on that spectrum. So it's more like than we like to think about. But this is the type of person that gets enjoyment out of pain, who, by creating pain and suffering in another person, they feel a sense of peace. satisfaction, or maybe even joy, contentment, positive emotions about creating suffering for other individuals. And again, this is not something that we like to think about, but it is something to be very aware of because we like to try to explain things away because they make, they give us reason. They offer us rationalization. Oh, this person was really hurt. Okay. There are also many, many people who were hurt in childhood who um, do not experience gratification, satisfaction, and desire to cause other people suffering. There are also people who were born and had a decent childhood who, no trauma to speak of, so to speak, nothing to point to and be like, oh, that's the reason that they have that hole in their soul, who operate similarly. And so in Western science, we talk about this kind of being like, what's on a biochemical level, and that sort of stuff. But really, if we're going from a spiritual perspective, we can consider that there are some people on a spiritual level that were born either entirely devoid of soul or who were born with only kind of the faintest glimmer of soul to the point where their emptiness is so large that they either cannot feel emotion or feel muted emotions or maybe feel apathy, or most significantly, how they can find some sort of satisfaction within themselves is creating pain from other people because it temporarily gives them a feeling of relief, and it temporarily feeds them. So before I get on to the third, I'm going to talk about what to do if you are targeted by energy vampires. And the first thing that I will say is that all of us at one point in time have been energy vampires. For example, a lot of us become energy vampires of the first type if we're sick. We want somebody to listen to us vent, listen to us whine, maybe make some soup for us. And it's a bit energetically draining on the people around us, but it's a temporary thing. It isn't, this long drawn out aspect of the personality coming from a sense of inner emptiness. It is temporarily, I don't feel good or I'm going through something hard. Let me kind of take on the energy of other people to help support me. And again, this first type often isn't malevolent at all. It is people reaching out in their loneliness, in their emptiness for some type of connection, empathy, and support. And so even calling it energy vampires in some ways puts a negative spin on it, and that is not my intent necessarily, but we can look at it as a temporary thing when people are going through difficulty. They might need to lean in and get more support from others as um, versus a fixed aspect of the personality. This person, whenever you meet them, is going to have a list of complaints and negativity about the world, and you are always going to feel drained after coming away from them. Um, or they are always going to be somebody that, in the first category, mildly broaches boundaries, in the second category, majorly broaches boundaries in an effort to create that emotional or nervous system response to feed off of. Um, I will say for the second category, what I've noticed over the years is that they tend to strike on Friday nights. I always thought that this was really interesting that they strike on Fridays, and I kind of sat with it for a while. And I realized that um, that's better feeding ground. If they can get during the week, most of us who have kind of somewhat of a regular schedule, so to speak, have don't have much time and energy. We're too busy working and dealing with all of the stuff of life. But on weekends, we have a bit of time to sort of ruminate and think about things. And this is a perfect time for all of that emotional reaction to come up, that nervous system response to come up. Basically, there's space there without a level of distraction for energy vampires to feed. And so I'm sharing this for a couple reasons, for a lot of different reasons. First of all, hopefully it's interesting. But second is that um, there are a lot of different practices that you can do when dealing with emotional vampires. The first is recognizing these mechanisms, recognizing the purpose behind it. If you can clearly recognize these mechanisms, what happens is that you move from a state of emotional reactivity into seeing the person for what they are. Oh, this has nothing to do with me. This person is trying to get a rise out of me to feed. That is unfortunate, whatever words you want to use on there. Sometimes people cycle through things before they can get to a state of just realizing something non-emotionally. Before that point, it's very typical to be like, oh, that's pathetic, that's unfortunate, oh, that person's psycho. Any of that sort of stuff. Oh, that person's broken. And what happens when you allow yourself to have those reactions to somebody, because it is a messed up thing, especially if we're talking about the second type of energy vampire, to act like this, because it's not only creating destruction around them, it's creating a lot of misfortune in their own lives. And unfortunately, they're not at a point to be able to clearly see this, that again, that they are the common denominators in their own lives, and that the reason that nobody wants to be around them is because of how they behave. Nobody wants to be fed off of, especially, by malevolent or really unfortunate individuals. So the first thing to do is to recognize the mechanism, to kind of develop awareness of your own energy to the point where when you're interacting with people, there can be a thought of, if you come away basically feeling the same, kind of neutral, if you come away feeling drained, or if you come away from feeling energized. And so I will say that this is not a one-time thing. If you encounter somebody and you feel a bit drained after, they may just be having a bad day. If you come away in a state of complete anger and fight or flight, as well as feeling really drained and overwhelmed, that might signify something. But again, it's sort of these repeated experiences over time. Picture yourself on your worst day and people judging you for that. You wouldn't want that. You'd want kind of a complete picture. So realize the purpose and energy behind this mechanism, because that moves you from reactivity into understanding the purpose of this. And that within your system will let you shut down your energy a bit just naturally. Oh, this person is trying to feed off of me. You can even tell yourself with intention, I'm going to stop that. I'm going to shut that down. The second thing to do is to do that quite intentionally, is to say, this is what is happening. You can do this internally or externally. This is what is happening. This person is trying to get at me, trying to attack me, or trying to drain me, trying to drain my empathy in order to feed off of me. And I do not allow that. I do not give permission for that. What will happen is that you will notice that the energetics change, the behavior changes. Unfortunately, for some energy vampires in the second category, particularly if they're quite delusional, is that they will tend to get fixated on certain people and again create a whole series of unfortunateness in their mind where you are the ultimate victim. And if somebody's gotten to the point of harassing, stalking, that sort of thing, some of these tools won't work. But luckily, most people are on the rest of the spectrum, which is realizing what they're doing and shifting your response. Because if you can start to feel a bit sorry for those people, wow, they are quite wounded, or even getting to, I jokingly call it a Jesus-y, they know not what they do. Um, which is that they are not doing this consciously. They are not doing this purposefully. Even people who are on the truly malevolent end of the spectrum, do you think that they want a life in which nobody wants to be around them? No, they're likely quite lonely and wounded. And the only thing that they have to sort of cloak themselves is denial and delusion, because otherwise they need to look at their behavior, how abusive they have been, how much they've harassed or harmed the people around them. And this is why some people cling to victimhood so much, is because to actually look at themselves and the damage that they have caused would, the abuse that they've done, the harm and evil they've brought into this world would be absolutely devastating. Their psyches couldn't handle it. And so they place all of that onto a convenient object, a projection, and act out that sort of delusion with them. And so I've seen this so many times, being a spiritual teacher as well as interacting with other people in the spiritual field. Unfortunately, a small segment of the population is really not mentally well. And I don't mean garden variety, depression, anxiety, OCD, panic, all of that sort of stuff where people can look at themselves and can take responsibility for themselves. I'm talking about cases really of stalking, harassment, really just delusional people that are really unfortunate. And there at times isn't much hope for them changing their behavior, changing their experience of reality, because again, it would be too much of a harsh awakening for them. And so, but let's talk about the rest of the like 98% of the spectrum here, because most people are not going to be in that last 2%, and those people often need to do very this world sort of stuff, like getting law enforcement involved if they can, and that sort of thing. Um, so I will say that recognizing who they are, eventually developing some type of empathy for them. That doesn't mean excusing their behavior, but it means clearly and dispassionately seeing who they are, what they are doing, the reason behind it, and going to a place of recognizing that if they knew that the wreckage that they're creating in their own lives, they if they could clearly see that, they likely would shift things. But also recognizing that what they're doing has nothing to do with you. They are in their own private kingdom of pain, of suffering, of soullessness, and they are just simply trying to fill up. And what they are trying to fill up on right now is you, but if you don't fill them up, chances are they're going to go find another target. And so if you just recognize this about them, they more than likely will find somebody that's a bit easier to fill up, albeit temporarily. So the best response for a lot of these people is no response, because they are looking for that energetic emotional response to feed off of. They are looking for more ammunition to energetically create a state of emotion within themselves as well, because that ammunition can fuel whatever thoughts, delusions that they have about themselves being a victim of reality, about themselves being alone, nobody loving them, nobody liking them, sort of stuff. So those are the best ways to deal with energy vampires, is clearly and dispassionately seeing them for who they are, recognizing that what they are doing has nothing to do with you, not taking it personally. What they're dealing with, what they're moving through this world with is a emptied or emptier space where a soul should be. And that is unfortunate, but it is a state that a lot of people are in. And so they purposely create emotion, create conflict in order to feed, in order to feel something, in order to an attempt to fill up those empty places. As I'm saying this, you can understand how common this is, especially with internet comment sections and, internet spaces overall, how many people out of a state of that state of emptiness, out of that state of soul loss are um, being enormously negative in spaces, deliberately creating confrontations, deliberately saying outlandish things, bringing up whatever they can about whomever they're fixated on in order to get some sort of response from others. So I'll quickly talk about the third kind of energy vampire, which is rarer, but it is out there, and most of you will likely not interact with them. And this is the conscious energy vampire. I will say that there are some people who deliberately and purposefully exchange energy with other people or feed off of energy from other people. And they do this for specific purposes. First of all, it may be healing in a particular way. It may be, for example, an experienced energy worker who has a friend who is in a state of panic. And so, what that experienced energy vampire does with consent is to feed off of that panic, basically taking some of that panic away from the person temporarily, or anger or fear, or whatever emotion is there, or whatever a nervous system response is there. I will say that certain types of shamans and energy workers do this as well. Well, they through touch, through their through touch, through breath, or through sucking, through varying implements, that there can be a release or removal of energy, and ideally this would be consensual. I will say a lot of energy vampires in this category cycle energy with one another, and it is a reciprocal response. So it is not one person feeding continually off the other person. It is, two people consensually doing it with one another, or a group doing it with one another when somebody needs um, that type of energy, that type of relationship. I will say that a lot of shamans and energy workers in the modern world don't do this, because when you uh, take energy in this way through breath, through sucking methods, that you are ingesting it into your system. And so this can really help the other person, but it results in some unfortunate stuff like vomiting or becoming very sick, um, you know, digestive issues, experiencing and having to cycle that energy, that emotion through your own body, which is not the ideal, although there are certainly some shamans and spiritual healers who do this purposefully for really heavy energies, but it does take a toll. There is a price for them being that being engaged in that type of work. And I will say for the record that I do not do that, so don't contact me for it. So I will end with that. Hopefully you found this interesting and you can really see the energetic mechanism behind this, not only in other people, but also sometimes in yourself, questioning, am I offering energy to the world, or am I taking energy from the world? What sort of energy does my presence really offer? And this is not intended for people on the beginning of their path. It is for people who can really sit with the fact that we are energy, we are consciousness, and we will give off a particular energy, a particular vibe, so to speak, sort of like waves going out into the ocean, and being aware of that and looking at the response to that as a method of saying, hey, I'm wondering if I should have something to work on within myself, or if there's some way that I can improve my own energy field, the integrity of it, the quality of it, so that people feel good, or a particular type of quality based off of my presence.